Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Jay Clark. I would like to thank our excellent group of panelists for volunteering their time and their experience and expertise today. The webinar addresses navigation under the general rubric of Management Today. And in our conversation, we want to address the topic of navigation from a variety of perspectives, from navigating conflict to navigating workspaces and everything in between. As Judah said, we're hoping to move beyond the traditional hierarchies of vertical structures of management so we can discuss how we all work together at all stages of our careers. At the end of our conversation today, we're going to have plenty of time for Q&A, so I encourage you to please submit your questions in the question box, which you can see in the dashboard on the right of the screen. So you just type in your questions whenever they come to you, and we will address them either during the webinar as relevant or towards the end. So please jump in and ask questions whenever you feel the urge. So I thought to kick us off today, it might be good to consider how the term management can best be defined today. Obviously, as I said, it's changed a lot over the last 5-10 years. So if our panelists could just jump in and maybe start with how you would define management.
I think that there are two different kinds of arts organizations. One is a small organization where not only is there a small staff, but the person in charge really makes decisions for everything. And I think what's key for me to management is who makes the decisions, who decides. Because I remember when I started working, there would be times when people would say, oh, there are no African-American artists or art. Or when I worked for the city of Savannah and they said, oh, they don't care about the arts. And the reason that people thought that way is because of the people who are making the decisions in museums and other places. So I think that that's really important. And I think it's also important as you start your career to decide, do I want to have a higher position where I decide in a smaller organization? Or do I want to be in a big organization where I respond to what's going on and only do a small part of what's happening?
That makes a lot of sense to me. And then sort of building on that, it strikes me that management is a lot about clarity of communication and, people really understanding what do they own and what do they, what are they not really responsible for? And I know in my own organization and certainly in client organizations, we see sort of a breakdown in management when there's a lack of clarity around who's responsible for doing what by when, and just really defining that really seemingly basic thing, but actually sort of more complicated to execute than you might imagine, can move organizations forward in a really powerful way. So like, where's the responsibility, but then also where's the authority?
Which is interesting because I think about management, I think about there's kind of a management structure. So like that leadership, which I think Ellen was speaking to, then there's the skill, there's the action of management, which actually should be happening at every level. Everyone should be owning whatever their part of it is and being responsible for it. And I think when you think about it that way and you try to create the organizational culture that way, it allows people to start practicing those skill sets, even when they're not formally management, because they're owning their work, they're responsible, they're managing the resources and the relationships that get that work done. And so I think we have to kind of think about it both ways, because I think as you're navigating your career, you want to be developing these. It's not like you just show up in management one day and know how to do it. These are skills you should have been practicing. And I think managers and supervisors should be more intentional about framing it that way with employees so that they realize they're developing a lot of those skills already.
Mhm.
And I think that independence is really important, increasingly so. I think people are looking for agency in their work and in their lives. And I think that being able to give that to people you're working with, people on your team, and to be able to be given it yourself, I think is very important. People want to feel like they're making a difference and that they're bringing their own skills to bear. And without independence and without giving people the room to be able to do that, they're not going to feel the agency that people are looking for in their lives.
I agree with what you both said. And I think one of the important things to empower everybody on your team so that they think about what's going on and they can buy into it because they feel like they're part of it. The other thing that I always feel strongly about is that the arts is really an entrepreneurship. And what an entrepreneur does is organizes and manages what's going on, but also it's usually initiation and risk. And I think it's really important that an arts organization take the initiative to do new things, even if sometimes it's at risk. And I also think that arts organizations should still be the conscience of society, and we ought to ethically feel that museums are responsible for bringing social justice issues and having people think about what's important in society, and have discussions about it in the communities.
I think it's interesting that you brought up the question of not necessarily how to manage, but how to, when you join an organization, when you're just starting in your career, how do you participate in the culture of management, even though you may not be a manager yourself? So I think that's an important thing to bring up. When you start, one doesn't necessarily know how to manage. And so I like what you brought up, Sheila, specifically about how you can participate in that culture while you're still learning.
Absolutely.
I also want to, can I just pop back to something that Ben said about the agency piece and, you know, people really wanting independence. And I think that's 100% true. I think there are some people though who don't quite know what that means in their own work. And so then you can say like, no, go for it. Take risks, you know, run off a cliff. I'll pull you back. It's okay. You know, and yet there's still, you know, a sense of waiting for very specific direction. And I think, you know, we as managers, and then, you know, you guys who are listening to this as managers, you know, really noticing the people who maybe are less likely to be independent or less likely to act without specific direction, and really provide specific places for them to venture forth so that they begin to feel more comfortable having agency and taking risks. I mean, I say to the people on my team, pretend I'm on an iceberg or you're on an iceberg and you have nobody else to ask about this. Like, I'm pretty sure you can figure this out. Like, what would you do? And it's amazing, like the creative ideas that people come up to if they're really thinking that they can't ask me, you know, what should I do?
It's funny because it brings to mind, one, it kind of dovetailed back, I think, into what Ellen was saying, an organization that is taking risks, that's just part of their culture and how it trickles down to how the staff feel their ability. Is this a place where I can take risks? But how you actually dealt with your staff. So I go on vacation for 2 weeks once a year. I call it my recuperative vacation. I don't answer emails. I don't answer the phone. And, you know, the thing was getting my team to the place where they felt comfortable, like when she's not here, we'll make a decision and keep it moving. And, you know, so some of it is, it's a give and take, working with your teams. It's a relationship. It's understanding those on your team who are just, you know, because you may have some who take too many risks and knowing when to, you know, how to pull them back, but also understanding and how to motivate the ones who maybe need a little bit more assurances or support around being a risk taker. So they are individuals. It's not a one size fits all, but understanding that you want them to kind of own their work, manage themselves, you know, again, developing those muscles makes it easier to understand when they're ready to take the reins and start managing others.
I think that comes down to what we were talking about, empowering people to think and to make decisions and to come together with ideas of how to move forward.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I also think part of that too is modeling being gentle on myself. I mean, taking responsibility, but being gentle on myself when I make mistakes. Because if people see me being really hard on myself when I'm making a mistake, then I think they're going to assume that I'm going to be really hard on them, you know, when they make a mistake. You know, so I think that, you know, that also is a big piece of managing people to be risk takers is, you know, how do you give the feedback when it doesn't go so well? And how do you treat yourself when things don't go so well?
It's challenging.
Well,
We tend
yes,
to be hardest on ourselves. There is actually
absolutely.
a article on LinkedIn today I saw about that, about caring when what happens when you make a mistake. How do you care for yourself? And I think the point that you know, people see what you're doing and how hard you are on yourselves, and that's an easy assumption that it's not going to be allowed for them either.
So I
No.
think one of the things you're both, Pamela and Sheila, talking about is a kind of management style. And I wanted to ask, my second question to the group is, how does our knowledge of various management styles impact our ability to succeed in various work environments?
I think that the team that works for you has to believe that you will support them, that you will have their back if something happens. And I think one of the worst management styles is when people who work for somebody feel like they don't have that support and they're not part of a very supportive team.
I think that different teams require different management styles and different projects require different management. In my work, I'm working with different people all the time on different projects, some of which are long-term, some very short-term. Some people need more support, some people need less. And some projects, you know, they can just be given a lot of freedom to kind of continue on their way until everyone's ready to bring them back. And so I think it's important for me and for people, you know, working on those kind of things who aren't just focused on one particular job description day in, day out, to be constantly thinking about what does this team that I'm working with at this moment require? And it changes from day to day.
Well, and I mean, I think that that's absolutely true. And I think there's also the challenge of sort of where you most comfortably sit as a leader or a manager, like whether you're someone who likes to kind of, if you're kind of a forest person, you know, you kind of like got the big picture and like to sit up here in the forest, or whether you're kind of a tree person and you're very focused on the specific task. And then, you know, the ability to kind of toggle back and forth between those things. And I think, you know, I'm more of a forest person, and so I really notice that I understand a lot of things very intuitively, and that sometimes as a manager, I'm less patient with translating that sort of realization of that vision down to sort of the tree level. And yet, if you're going to expect people to execute really well, then they need to understand kind of the whole range of things, unless they're that person that you were talking about, Ben, who really has agency. And you can just say, look, this is kind of where we're headed. You know, as long as you're going in the right direction, it's fine with me how we get there. But not everybody, so those are the kinds of people that I'm most comfortable working with because of where I sit. But not everybody operates with that level of agency. And so I really had to train myself to be willing to take the time to really drill down, so that the people who feel less agency really understand what it is that they need to do by when. And I think sort of just I've noticed over the years that ability to toggle back and forth between the big picture and the detail almost constantly has the biggest impact on my being able to be an effective manager.
Yeah, I connect with that quite a bit, and I think it depends on you know, the small, large organization thing again too, because in a smaller organization, you could be supervising, managing people at different levels. So their needs are different. And, you know, where do you kind of fit in? I do think you want to make space for experimentation, for the risk taking, for the agency. You know, but as a CFO, you know, the money has to be like there's some things that are really concrete when you're on kind of the administrative operational side. So you know, I like to think of myself as a coach manager. I'm more, you know, so maybe that's thinking about it from the forest, you know, win the game, but I'm not actually going to go out on the court and play, but giving them the resources and the support they need to be able to go out and play. That's kind of my style. You know, the one kind of like management style that I do like that I've read in a book. Most of my management style really came out of just self-reflection of myself over the years, but is the management by walking around. I'm a strong believer in that one. I think you want to, you know, you want to see and be seen, and, you know, give people time and be really connected to the organization. I think that also comes back to me being more of an administrative operational person who can be very behind the scenes, and, you know, the need to kind of come out and see what the institution does, you know, go to the programs, go to the events, go to the openings, and see what the work is that, you know, we're supporting and doing. I think that's a very important part of management as well.
I think for a prospective employee, it's also important to think about as you're interviewing, you know, what is the management style of the person that you're going to be reporting to, and is it a good fit?
Oh, for sure, for sure. I think that's like one of the key things in terms of being successful in your career is finding the right environment for you. And I know that's another, we'll get to that on another webinar, but how do you know if it is, you know, how, those are the kind of questions you want to ask. You do want to delve into the manager's style, and you want to ask through stories. I mean, the same way you get interviewed, you kind of want to interview the interviewer back to be clear kind of what is the culture of the organization. Is this somewhere where how I work? So some of it is about you know, the prospective employee being, you know, having some self-awareness about what works for them. It's what I love about internships. You know, go do as my niece says, do as many as possible and do them in different kinds of organizations so you can see, you know, do I fit better in the large organization, the mid-size, the small? You want to give yourself, see some examples of kind of the different kinds of work environments that are out there.
The other great trick is to go on LinkedIn and see how much turnover there's been at the level, you know, it's sort of in the title or the level at which you're looking, or if you can figure out sort of the general org chart, who might be reporting into the person that you're going to report to. And if you're seeing like 1 year, 2 year, 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 1 year, you want to ask a lot of questions before you take that job.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I would like to find out a bit from you all. What would your advice be to employees, to colleagues, when it comes to navigating conflict resolution with one's manager in a management environment? Because it's a part of life.
I think it depends on what the conflict is about. I think that if you're talking about somebody that is your manager, to me it would be if it's something that involves my conscience or something that I feel like I'm giving up my integrity to do, I would never do it, and would continue the conflict to whatever, trying to support what I think. If it's something with somebody who I report to and it doesn't make that kind of difference in the way you feel about yourself and you don't think it's unethical, because I have been faced with that, then it's a lot easier to go along with things and make some changes to so that there's agreement. If it's the people who work for you, hopefully you won't have a conflict that has to do with integrity, because you've hired these people and they know what you stand for. For instance, we had a museum at South Carolina State University that was a museum of conscience and social justice. And somebody's not going to come for a job there if that's not what they believe in. But we did have conflicts in the staff and the teams. And what I usually did was talk to each person individually, see what the problem was, and then try to meet with them together and at least try to make it so that it's a peaceful environment and we can all work together moving ahead.
I think it's really important to build as quickly as possible a deep relationship with the people you're working with at whatever level, so that any conflict can come as part of that and can be engaged with. You can deal with it, get over it, because there's a trust, there's an ongoing relationship there, which is about more than the conflict. I think that if all you're experiencing is conflict, then that is, that's a really bad sign. I think that, conflict needs to be just part and parcel of what you're dealing with. And if you have kind of ongoing relationship of trust, of liking each other, of a reputation where you can be relied upon, then any conflict is just going to be, you'll deal with it, you'll figure out a solution, and you'll move on. Like you were just saying, it's it's part and parcel of life. So you just have to engage with it and then move on to the next thing.
I totally agree with that, and sort of building on that, taking a breath, if there's like an immediate conflict, just sort of stepping back, and something doesn't have to be dealt with immediately, although, bad news is best delivered fresh. And so, if something happens and people need to know about it, communicating about it quickly, even if the news isn't going to be well received, I think it's going to be a lot better received today than 2 days from now, for sure. So I think that's really important. I think also stepping back and sort of, to the extent that workplaces can sometimes feel like, repetitions of unresolved family conflicts or unresolved family dynamics, to the extent that you can step back and ask yourself, like, what does this remind me of? Like, does this actually remind me of something? And is my button getting pushed because, something that happened 20 years ago? And I don't mean to sound like over psychoanalytic about it, but, our structures, our work structures do in many ways repeat family structures where there's someone in charge who's meant to know what's going on. And then, people who are under them who are sort of acting in one way or another. And I found for myself, when I reflect, like, what does this remind me of? I'll be able to sort of pull the emotion out of it. Like, the thing might still need to be discussed, but I won't bring the level of feeling to the conversation that I might. And then with staff, I really like the management center rubric, which is, if something's going wrong, like, I'm noticing that, so just observing the behavior. It matters because, so, why is this important? What are your thoughts? So getting input from the person who you're speaking with, and then let's problem solve around this together. And there's no criticism or judgment really baked into that conversation. It's just observation, importance, inviting the person in, and then problem solving. And for me, it's taken a lot of the charge out of giving feedback. So, like, I'm not giving a criticism sandwich, right? The positive, negative, positive, which, really doesn't work so well. And it's been, for me, really helpful in working with my own team.
Yeah, I'd have to concur, especially what Ben said. I think, these are relationships, and with them kind of based in a shared goal and mission, to move forward the work of the organization. There's a trust and a relationship there that, you try to lean on open and honest conversation and dialogue and talk it out. So
one of the things I wanted just to mention to those participating in terms of the Q&A box, just wanted to let you all know we will not be identifying the person asking the question, just so you all feel comfortable asking whatever questions you want. The question, the Q&A box will be anonymous in terms of, reporting out who's asking what question. So related to navigating conflict, in many organizations, one's dealing with different leadership styles, different management styles, even in one area. So I wanted to ask our panelists, what would your advice be about how we can navigate different work and leadership styles? Crickets.
You got us that time. I think in most things, I like to say, you just have to start with yourself. I think you have to begin with being authentic yourself, and again, open and honest communication, being able to, and a lot of it depends on that culture environment we were talking about before. Do I feel comfortable, talking with my supervisor about kind of, where I think I'm not getting clarity about what they want, their expectations, how we're going to work. It really is key that you have that kind of openness with your colleagues, your peers, and the people you report to, and be able to kind of, because I think part of, because I have people that end up with all kinds of work styles working for me, but I have one, and you kind of together again. I think of all of this as relationships. I see these people every 5 days a week, or however long they work, like we're in relationships. So it's not just that I kind of morph to fit them, they morph to fit me as well. Like we do it together. I think that's when it's best. But I don't know that the relationship I have with all the people who report to me is exactly the same relationship. That they're, what they bring authentically to it impacts that as well. And I think that's when it's best. I don't need you to kind of work my style. And actually, I think the complementary thing gives us more value in terms of the work team, to have these different work styles. Diversity is good. So even in kind of work styles, that can be useful. But you have to be able to have the conversation, to talk it out, to connect those styles with, a plan to get the work done, to get to our shared goal.
I think the fact is also it takes a little time, and everyone needs to be cognizant of that. You can't land in a new situation and immediately find your feet. You have to experiment a little and spend a little time working with different people and push each other's buttons a bit as well, and have a little bit of conflict and figure out how you're going to handle it. And then, hopefully after a relatively short period, you figure it out together.
It brings up a good point. Like, it's not, I think sometimes when you say the word conflict or disagreement or in work styles, like it's this negative connotation, but conflict doesn't have to be, we can all think differently. We can bring different perspectives to it. That can be a rich exchange as well, and actually add a lot of value and richness to the work.
I think it also sort of navigating this stuff depends on where you sit. So, as executive search consultants, we have multiple managers. We've got multiple clients with search committees, and, generally there's a person that we're primarily dealing with, but still sometimes it's a group of board members, and the culture of a search committee really varies from client to client, and it's incumbent upon us to adjust. Mm-hmm. We have like a general process and a way of working, and that standard remains. But, stylistically, we kind of have to shift a little bit depending on kind of the character of the group, and just really listening to what does this group need in order to move forward. And this goes back to sort of the definition of leadership that we had talked about when we met earlier, you know, that looking around you at everything that's happening around you and thinking about, well, how can I contribute to all of this going as well as possible? And like, if that becomes your lens, then it's sort of like, well, this person who's over me needs X, and this person who is sitting next to me needs Y, and this person who reports to me needs something else. But the lens of, I want everything to go as well as possible for all these different people, then it becomes a lot less complicated to think about management, because you're just like, oh, you know, that person needs a pat on the back. That person needs detailed communication about everything all the time. You know, this person doesn't want to hear from me unless I have really important news to share. And that's what makes it go best for each of those people.
Actually, Pamela, what you just raised, I'd like to bring up a question that was sent to our question box, because it relates in some ways to that. And the question is, are there any tips for managing across teams when colleagues on a project are not in your reporting line? How to best determine the style needed on that day and for that project? Kind of going back to Ben's question earlier, I think that's a great question.
And we deal with this all the time, because, you know, we're constantly dealing with people who don't report. I mean, search committees don't report to me. The staffs of organizations don't report to me. And yet I really need them as allies. We really need them as allies in order to get our work done. And they really need to trust us in order to listen to us when we're giving them advice about, you know, the talent that they're going to hire. I really think approaching these things in sort of a mode of servant leadership is like a really good approach. Like, I am here to help you. You know, if you're an internal marketing and communications person or a fundraiser, or, you know, and you're working across the organization, you know, say you're a fundraiser and you're going to curatorial and you need their help giving a tour to a donor, for example. If I were the fundraising person, I would really approach that curator through the lens of, I am here to help you. I really want us to land this gift so that you can do a big exhibition, you know, or realize this vision that you have for this project. And then, you know, so that's sort of like the individual, like moving across the organization. And then in terms of getting people to do stuff that you need them to do, like really helping people understand why this is in their best interest. And like really framing it not in terms of the task, but in terms of the goal. You know, if we can do this, look what it's going to allow us to do, and sort of painting that vision for where you're all going together. Now, of course, that being successful is predicated on everybody agreeing that you're all going to the same place. But, you know, that's really how I would frame it. And we spend a lot of time doing that with our clients.
I think goals and visions are definitely the most important thing when you're headed to doing a project. One of the things with different people, working with other people, is we did a lot of collaborations with other organizations. And so you certainly don't have management say over somebody you're doing a collaboration with. That's what a collaboration is. You talk about it, you work together, and you figure out something that is mutually beneficial. We also work with students. The teams that I worked with included students, and trying to integrate training and empowerment for youth is always part of the management that we were doing. How do you make the student feel part of, and that their decisions are really important? And how do you get them to work out with the people who work with you? So sometimes it goes on various levels.
I think being able to articulate that goal and that mission is incredibly important. I'm often in a position where in a for-profit company, I'm the one trying to rally people behind a project that isn't going to make any money right now. So I really have to think about what the long-term goal is going to be, I have to be able to articulate why relationships are important and why reputation is important. And, you know, try and keep people moving towards that common goal. I kind of try and balance the importance of being really, really grateful and thanking people, and at the same time, kind of showing leadership and saying, no, we're all working on this. You were, either you volunteered or you were volunteered for this, or you, for whatever reason, you're taking part in this project. And it may not be relevant to your day-to-day, or I may be dragging you away for something more urgent, but I'm going to keep pushing, and at the same time being really grateful and showing you that, you know, even though this may not be your highest priority right now, it is really important to the broader goals of the company or of the team or whatever project we happen to be on.
I actually think if, you know, you have these cross-functional and departmental teams and collaborative kind of project teams, I think it's a missed opportunity if those teams have to be structured to match the formal hierarchy of the organization. I see no reason why there's a project team that someone who's not a manager could be the leader of the team. The team can decide that. They can kind of select, you know, so they have these goals, these visions. They also can set how they're going to work. You know, there could be shared leadership. They can experiment with different kinds of leadership and management models. But I love when we do little projects under my umbrella, and you know, the more junior person, you know, kind of, you're going to run the meetings, you're going to, you know, kind of do the coordinate, because it's an opportunity for them to again practice and develop these managerial skills. So, you know, the reporting of them, that was the part of the question that stuck with me, was how do you get them to cooperate when, you know, in the formal organizational structure, they don't report to you or they're not as senior as you, because the team can self-select and self-organize themselves, and whether that's 3 people who all share kind of the oversight for this group effort and work, or they assign one person. They all can hold each other accountable. They all can, you know, assignments give out, we're all going to hold each other. I think that's an opportunity. It's also an opportunity for us to experiment with new ways to work that ultimately, if it's a better way to work, could become more formalized. I think it's the way the organization continues to learn how to do its work best. So that would be my hope, is that, you know, they can do that, and that it's a culture in the organization that allows that kind of experimentation.
Sheila, I want to get back to something you just raised. I mean, we're all always, you know, morphing and changing and learning. And as an art historian, I know I was never trained in management. I was trained as an art historian. And so I had to find that my own ways of working with others and different management styles. Some of that is, some people have those gifts naturally, others really need to work on it. And I wanted to know if you all had any suggestions of, you know, this is an amazing opportunity, this 3-part webinar that people are taking, but outside of that, what will your suggestions be about how to learn more about different management styles?
I'm a huge proponent of experiential learning, like learning by doing. That's how adults tend to learn things. So again, creating opportunities within the organization, because the number one thing, and I don't know if others have had this, when you kind of survey staff about professional development and training, I don't have time. I can't go to that training. I don't have, so like, you know, if you know that's a challenge, why can't we just use the work we're doing as that laboratory, and being intentional about it also being work and a learning opportunity. And again, creating these collaborative teams that work on specific projects, giving people maybe not informal leadership an opportunity to lead one of those teams and practice. You know, the reality is we're not like just all of a sudden we have these skills and these know-hows. I've been a manager for a long time, and I messed up like the first half of my entire career. I did it all wrong. And I spent the second half of my career, okay, no, don't do it that way, do it this way. Because it really is a trial and error kind of thing. So the most, I think as an organization, as a manager for myself, the more opportunity I give my staff to kind of, in this safe space, do this trial and error, the more likely they're going to be able to move on with their career. It really is, it's a skill, and skills get better with practice. That's how it works.
I think everybody learns as you move forward and changes the way you do things. I mean, I started out with a master's in arts administration, and I have taught that in a few universities, but I can tell you, I have evolved as I went along, and you start maybe with something you've learned, but the real experience is doing it and being with people and being in different situations, and then you get better at it.
And doing it in different environments.
Training should not be relevant. You learn while you do it.
I think doing it in different environments is really important. I found volunteering, being on a volunteer board, really, really helpful. I did it for a number of years. I'm glad I'm not doing it anymore. Although, you know, I think about doing it again in the future, but being in a position of being on a board, learning that, having to manage executive staff members, gave me a really good view and kind of experience outside of working in my day-to-day career, which I think I've now been able to bring back. You know, it gave me kind of an area where I was able to experiment a little, where there was conflict to deal with, all sorts of challenges that felt challenging, but also felt different, and, you know, felt like a place to play around and do things a little differently and figure out what worked.
I also think setting up intentional structures for management is really helpful. Like, okay, as a team, we're meeting once. I mean, I know that sounds really basic, but you'd be amazed at how many people do not do this stuff. You know, as a team, we're meeting once a week. We're going to have an agenda. The goal of this meeting is, and then, you know, okay, as individuals, we're going to meet one-on-one X number of times. If we're kicking off a project, this is the process by which we define roles and responsibilities. This is the process by which we track against our goals. This is the process by which we evaluate whether or not we were successful. And, you know, we're all so busy that sometimes it feels easier just to dive in and start the project. And you know, there's that distinction between kind of working in the business, so sort of that day-to-day, everything that's coming at you, and then working on the business. And, you know, most management books I've ever read said, you know, you should be, in any role, should be spending about 20% of your time working on the business. So thinking about how you're actually going about doing your stuff, I would venture that 95% of the workforce does not spend anything like 20% of their time thinking about how they're going about their work, and they spend almost all of their time just trying to keep up with the work. And so making that that thinking about the how, really like baking that into people's jobs, and maybe 20% is just unrealistic, particularly in nonprofit organizations. But even just saying like, okay, guys, like an hour, 2 hours a week, we all should be thinking about how we're going about this, and, you know, coming up with other better ways of maybe doing this so that we can advance the whole enterprise, not just, you know, the individual task that's in front of us at this moment. You know, really good example on my team. My team is pretty much mostly remote. We spend all day on a Zoom. We open a Zoom link in the morning. You know, people don't keep their camera on all day long necessarily, or their microphone on, but I can get to anybody on my team immediately, and just say, hey, can I just pop in for a question here? And that was an idea around sort of how were we managing ourselves that came from my team, because she's in San Antonio and she felt too remote. And so now we hang out on Zoom all day, and it has been a massive game changer. It was because she was thinking about the how we were working versus just working.
Yeah, I just have to piggyback on what Pamela said a little bit, because I am amazed at how many people don't do kind of one-on-one meetings with their teams. And why that's so critical is that when things are not going well, you do those meetings. So they only kind of represent a negative interaction when they happen. But if you're doing them regularly, and for some people who do them, they're always about the work. They're never about the how. And, you know, what I would suggest is that if you supervise people, you should have at least once a month a meeting where all you're asking is, how are they doing? Like, what's not working for you? What is working for you? Like, don't deal with the to-do list or the task list. Talk about their experience in their role, doing, like, you know, where are the good connections, where are the things we need to improve in terms of working with different departments or whatever it is there. That, I think, and again, that's that coach supervise, but I think that's the real kind of work, because I know at my organization, I work with some incredibly smart people. They usually can figure out the kind of moving it from A to B. It's this larger contextual stuff that they need, the how, that they need, you know. Sometimes I know for me, it helps me to just have somebody else. I'm brainstorming, throwing ideas around, you know. I just think that's really, really, really important, that is part of the kind of, you know, the work, how we do the work.
And I think it's really important to connect to some of the organizations and your colleagues in these organizations. One is the foundation that is doing this presentation. Art museum curators, meet with other art museum curators and find out information, come to the conference. I learned a lot for being a part of the Association of African American Museums. I met a lot of colleagues there. I presented. I brought my staff to present. I brought students to present. And we were able to connect and learn a lot from other people. Obviously, there's also the American Alliance of Museums and many other organizations in all of the arts. And I think participating not only by being a member, but by going to the conferences, presenting at the conferences, writing articles about what's happening, you really can learn a lot and make a big difference in your management skills.
We've got some good questions from the floor, so I wanted to just pop in with a couple of those. One person asked, what advice do you have for women who are managers in an all-male department and male-dominated tech field, where part of the environment is that their authority and skills are constantly challenged and there is little opportunity for mentorship from other managers?
What has helped me? So in my role, I I don't do technology, but I am responsible for it here at the organization. But I do finance, and that's been the thing I've done the longest, which when I first came into the business in the late 80s, early 90s, was very male dominated. What I did find was that it helps to find the others. So again, these associations, the women's associations, and I'm sure there are some in technology, and being able to kind of, so because there's something about community that is helpful when dealing with some challenging things. That was what kind of helped me. You know, the other thing that, I mean, this is probably not the answer they're looking for, but the thing that helped me was being confident in what I was doing. So, you know, kind of standing my ground in terms of the work that I was producing and having a lot of confidence in that. And, you know, it's circular, because having that community that I could go to who kind of held me up as well and had that support helped me in kind of my day-to-day when I was in environments where I was kind of challenged or kind of maybe pushed to the side and, you know, not expected. I kind of like stood in the middle of the room and said what I had to say. So that, you know, I'm just sharing a personal experience here. I'm not sure. I know that can be difficult, but the one thing I will say is, you know, build that network outside of even just where you work of people who do what you do and get support through some of that.
I want to piggyback on the confidence piece. I mean, I think there's a big value in faking it till you make it, and that's not sort of the same as having a mentor. I'll just tell a quick story. I was my first ever executive director search, and the search chair was one of the first female partners of McKinsey, and everyone else on the search committee was male, very wealthy, and probably at least 20, if not 30 years older than I was. And a few weeks into the search chair called me and she said, this collaborative leadership style might work for you, but it's really not working for me. She said, you're the expert. We've hired you to be the expert. We do not know how to do a search. You know how to do a search. And so she's like, step up and take control and do your job. And, I got this phone call from her and I was really upset. And honestly, she did me a huge favor because she was just basically like, own your space and, own your knowledge and don't defer to these old men, just like go. And, I can almost remember word for word what she said to me, and it was incredibly painful. I was sobbing in my office after she got off the phone with me, and it changed my life and it changed my work life. So, easier said than done, I know. But it's really true. I mean, sometimes you just got to step into your space and take it.
Okay, another question from the floor. How would you recommend dealing with an employee who produces good work, but has a toxic, uncooperative personality? Where do you draw the line?
I mean, I would draw the line pretty fast and pretty tightly, but I still think sort of the rubric that I laid out before really works for this, which is I'm noticing that, you do amazing work, but your attitude is X, it matters because, it's creating a negative feeling in the office. What are your thoughts? And like, let the person weigh in, and maybe you'll hear like, a whole bunch of stuff that is, bothering them. And then, okay, well, how can we problem solve around this? Because your attitude can't continue. Like, it's too heavy, it's too big a negative on the office. And then, say, okay, like, let's try this and let's check in 2 weeks and see how it's going. But like, it needs to stop. I mean, that's what I would do, because I think it's unfair, honestly, to the other staff members to have to kind of navigate around that.
I think it's important that in the hiring that we are aware and, vet and recruit and interview in a way that allows us to know, because I think in some cases that this is kind of a set behavior, a behavior pattern. I don't know that it's worth bringing, because it's work. Dealing with a toxic, that kind of situation is work, and it's work for everybody generally. So the question is, can we absorb that additional work? And then when if you have someone and you've done that kind of work and you feel like you're hiring like-minded people who understand the mission and want to work in the way that the culture of the organization works, and they come in and this happens, I think one, there has to be a conversation, because if that's not who they were, and now all of a sudden there's probably something happening there. So I think a conversation, just as Pamela described, is warranted. But I do think if without the behavior changing, ultimately there is a line that has to get drawn. There is, because it can be really detrimental to the organization to have that kind of, especially if you're being very intentional about the kind of culture you're trying to have in your organization, of collaboration, of partnership, of trust and relationship and respect. It can be a problem.
So I have a question about navigating our workspaces, and why is that even an important thing to do? Why is that something that we should be talking about in this webinar? I mean, I think you addressed it a bit, Sheila, when you said you walk around.
Yeah.
It's a really interesting example.
Yeah, I think kind of so with the walking around again, being in touch with people, access to people, again, it's all about, for me, it's all about the relationship. And relationship is like everything else. It's over a spectrum, and every relationship with every person that I work with isn't exactly the same, but they're all kind of based on this mutual respect, mutual partnership, and shared vision and goals basis. And so I like to walk around and talk to everybody. That doesn't mean I'm directing or managing, but I want to kind of understand what people's work experiences are and what's happening, what's not. I find out a lot of information doing that. And in my role, I'm in a formal role to address some of those things and make some, improvements and things like that. And everybody's asking for the same thing when I talk to them. Oh, then we need to do that thing because it will help them do their work. I do think it's interesting question. I mean, when we talked about it before, because I've been in the work world for over 30 years. I've done cubicles, I've done offices, and now I'm doing the open office space and, just the environment itself and how the space plays out. I do think impacts. I think it all impacts. I think different individuals have to decide because I think what's of importance to like the priority list of these things can be different for each person. So some of it's just about self-awareness and understanding what your needs are and being clear about that.
I think utilizing as many different forms of communication as possible is really important. I mean, I could sit at my desk and just send out emails for 8 to 9 hours a day, but it's, by the third email, it's going to be more effective to pick up the phone or call a meeting. I work a lot with teams all over the country and all over the world and with museum partners all over the country. And getting on a plane is really important for me. In the last couple of years that I've been in this position, I've traveled a lot because having a face-to-face meeting with people that I'm working with, even if it's just once, so that then we have, some sort of, we recognize each other, we have some sort of common experience of having had lunch together, has been so important. And now that I've been in this position for a couple of years, it's easier because I've met a lot of the people that now I'm emailing with or phoning or sending a formal letter to.
I agree with that, sort of the power of FaceTime. And we've actually started doing client conference calls via Zoom. And, not everybody has a camera and not everybody can figure out the technology, simple as it is. But it makes a difference. People are more present on a Zoom conference than they are on a phone conference. You can't really check your email. You kind of can, but not really when you're on a Zoom. So that's been really important. And then seconding what you said, Ben, if I'm sending an email that's more than a couple sentences long, this is a phone call. Mm-hmm. And, I understand the value of sort of documenting the list and having the record of what everybody's going to do, but it erodes connectivity and it takes actually more time. We can speak a lot faster and with a lot more nuance often than we can write. And even though people feel like it takes longer to pick up the phone and call somebody, it actually doesn't. And so that habit of email and the convenience of email, because you can send it anytime. It doesn't matter if there's somebody on the other end to receive it now or 6 hours from now. It's off of your plate, but it's still not necessarily ultimately the most efficient or effective way to communicate. So I'm constantly saying to my team, this is a phone call. I don't want to get a 3-page email from you. This is a phone call. And that's why the Zoom thing has been so helpful, because now it's not even having to pick up the phone. It's just, hitting me with a chat and saying, can you turn on your volume for a second? Mm-hmm.
Well, it comes back to effective communication. I'm sorry. Just because when you send an email, you've said something, but you don't know if they received exactly the message. And if they don't receive the message you're trying to give, you have not effectively communicated. So it's good for documenting what was said or just having a record. But when I need to, share something, and I need to know you understand or I want to know you understand, I need to have face-to-face phone call, something. I need to talk to you. Email doesn't do that. You don't know how it lands.
I just wanted to say one other thing about meetings. I think it is really important, though, as useful as I find face-to-face meetings and team meetings, creating a culture where time is respected, where a 15 or a 30-minute meeting is legitimate, where everyone understands that meeting rooms are shared in most workplaces, and on the dot of the time that they change, you've got to get out of there because the next meeting's coming in. And I've worked in places where that was not the case, and now I certainly try and do my part to make sure that is respected, and that every meeting has an agenda, that people know why they're there, that kind of thing, because otherwise it can just become a waste of time.
There's a new book.
I agree about face-to-face, and I'll give you an example. I got an email from some people, and they sent it to a lot of different museums talking about their African collection. I not only responded with an email, but I called them on the phone, and I went with some students, and we visited them at their house in Florida, and we made friends with them. We developed a relationship with them, and they donated millions of dollars worth of African art to us. And it was totally by building a relationship. And so it's really important, whatever happens, to build personal relationships with people that you work with in any capacity.
So thank you. We've got about 13 minutes left. So I wanted to remind those of you who have questions, please go ahead and send them in. And we are going to, as Ben wisely said, we're going to end this meeting on time. But I did want to jump to the Q&A. One question is, how close of a relationship should a supervisor have with their subordinates? Should they be checking in with them to see if the supervisor's subordinates are also leading well, or is that undermining?
I think you check in with everybody, and you want a relationship with everybody you work with, and you check in on them in a way that doesn't undermine their position.
Others?
I think you should be being transparent with the person they report to. I mean, it shouldn't be done outside of them. You should be clear with your direct reports that, again, management by walking around. So I talk to everybody. I mean, the director of facilities reports to me, but I'll have a conversation with the custodian. I'll ask, I'll just talk to them. I'm not like having a supervisor meeting or anything. I'm just talking to them. I had a whole conversation about the basketball game last night with one this morning when I came in. But, it's in those moments that you get feedback or you hear, it's casual, but it's connection. I do talk to the people. I talk to everyone. I consider all of them on my team, even if they don't report to me directly, because they're part of the team that the things I'm responsible for institutionally get done. And they all need to have access to me. So I think it's important to be transparent about how you manage and how you'll be engaging with different people, So my staff all know I do that. This is not something that I think they would be feeling uncomfortable about. But I can understand. I understand the question is being asked because that's not everywhere. It doesn't work like that. Again, the culture and how the institution functions is important to understand.
In our client organizations, the places that have the best culture, like everyone in the organization feels seen and acknowledged, and it feels like the people 2 levels above them or 3 levels above them like understands and appreciates the way that their work contributes to the success of the whole, and feel valued. And part of that feeling valued is that, the person knows their name, and maybe they don't supervise them, but they know their name. And we've been in organizations, even relatively small organizations, where, some of the part-time staff felt like the executive director didn't know who they were. and it eroded the culture. And they said, like, we would just love this person to come and sit down like once a month and have a sandwich with us. And again, not in a supervisory way, but just in a sense of you are valued and important no matter where you sit in this organization. And so I think that that's the frame through which I would reach out to people at all levels of an organization.
Thank you. So we have another question. What are your thoughts on working with career coaches for helping folks to work towards preparing for leadership positions, executive director, et cetera? Are they worth the expense, and how would you recommend finding the right fit?
I've had a lot of coaches. I had a coach when I started my business. I've had different kinds of coaches at various points in developing my business for really different specific purposes. I've interviewed a lot of coaches to find the right coach. The lovely thing about coaches is that most of them have the mentality that like they really want you to have the right fit. And so I've had coaches recommend 3 more coaches for me to talk to if they don't happen to be the right person. I think knowing what you're wanting, what you're hoping to get out of it will help you find the right person, and doing some like almost like self-coaching to figure out what that is. But I think for me, like coach is about sort of framing the goal, holding me accountable, helping me identify the steps to get there, you know, kind of cheering me on. And listen, I think it's 100% worth the investment. And I think it sort of makes a statement to yourself internally when you invest in yourself, when you say, I'm worth this investment, my career is worth this investment. I kind of feel like the air around you changes. And then, you know, that also has kind of a ripple effect out into the rest of your life. So I'm a fan.
I think that's true in terms of other training as well. I don't have a huge amount of experience with coaches, but I've identified in my career a few places where I felt like it was worth the time and the money, my own money, to invest in some training, external training. And that was really helpful. And I agree with Pamela that made a sign to myself and to the people I was working with that I'd like to take a couple of days off and go and do this training seminar that I'm going to pay for because I've decided this is worth it to what I'm doing and to my career. And I've never regretted that. Do I wish that some of those training sessions would have been offered by the organizations I worked for? Maybe, but they were in each of the cases I did it, they were very specialized and they were not something that were relevant to a lot of other people. So, you know, it was worth it for me to invest the time and the money, and I sought the support. I would say the same is probably true for executive coaches, although, you know, I haven't had much experience in the last few years of that.
I think it's also worthwhile asking your institution, because sometimes there are, you know, oftentimes we have to pay for these things ourselves, but sometimes there are professional development monies set aside that we may not be aware of. So it's always worthwhile asking as well.
I think it depends where you are in your career, because at some point I guess I stopped working where I was and I did a master's in arts administration at NYU, and I've never been sorry. Not only did I learn a lot, but I also made a lot of contacts, met a lot of people, and I've been on panels there, I taught there, and sometimes it's the right thing to do to go and take a degree at a place that has a really good program. The other interesting thing is that when I was doing project in Taiwan, all these people kept coming over to me and talking to me because I was from NYU and they had gone there and they knew about it or whatever. So I think a lot of times it can make a big difference as you move forward.
Well, the title of our session is navigation, and I think the most important thing about, you know, going to the next level or reaching your kind of career goals is that you're the one driving the bus. You're navigating it, you're driving the bus, and all of these things, coaching, additional outside training, you know, all of these are tools to help you do that. And it's really, I mean, I agree with what Pamela said 100%. You kind of got to do your own self-assessment and figure out what that is. Because you can get a coach to take you to the next level to be, you know, an executive director. But once you become one, you may still need a coach. You know, there may be aspects of the job that, you know, that I just think the coaching, I'm a big fan of it as well. Because I just think it's just, a lot of it is, especially in the 21st century, so much of it feels like new, like, oh, there's no, you know, guideline for how to deal with this. And it's really kind of having that coach or somebody, whether it's a colleague or in different kinds of relationships, to kind of brainstorm and think about. What I like about coaching is they help you deal with what you're bringing to the table. They help you deal with your strengths and your, you know, the things, your challenges, to be the best, your best self. So I agree with Pamela 100%. I'm a big fan of coaches. So yes, if you can afford it, absolutely.
So I think we have time to squeeze in one more question from the floor. On the subject of positive conflict, how would you as managers suggest strategies for people seeking to manage up and, quote, speak truth to power when they might feel vulnerable or concerned about seeming confrontational?
Mm-hmm.
I spend a lot of time managing up. I think what I find most useful is knowing my stuff, because I'm kind of a subject area expert. That's kind of the role that I have in the company and that I went into and that I've created for myself, making sure that I'm staying up on everything that's relevant to my world, to my subject, so that I can, with confidence, speak truth, you know, and speak truth to power. If I didn't have that confidence in my own knowledge and my experience, I think I'd find it much more difficult.
Yeah. I feel like I'm going to sound like a broken record, but I still think you can use the, I'm noticing that it matters because what are your thoughts? And, you know, again, it's not judgmental. It's not confrontational. It's observational, and ask the person for their input. It wouldn't work for everybody, but I do think it could work in a lot of cases.
So I think we're going to have to wrap things up. Thank you all so much for participating. I learned a lot, and I hope the audience did as well. It's been fun getting to know you four, and I hope we meet live one day soon. And thanks to AAMC for organizing this series of webinars. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.